After a month and a half of ups and downs week after week with the Ahsoka series, it finally comes to an end. But is it a satisfying end to the season that leaves us wanting more? Or were our hopes and expectations for this show just too high to meet? What's up, Nerdgenic Nation and fellow Star Wars enthusiasts, Aaron Waller here, and today I want to give my thoughts on the 8th and final episode of Season 1 of the Star Wars Disney Plus series, Ahsoka. And in this episode, Ahsoka, Sabine, and Ezra must do everything they can to stop Thrawn from leaving Peridea, while also worrying about how they will themselves get back home at the same time. And after watching this episode and knowing that it essentially had the weight of the world on it to deliver, as I expected, it inevitably failed. But before we get into all that, let's first go over the good, because there was some sprinkled in here. Few and far between, but it was in there. So one of the things that I liked was Ezra building himself a lightsaber and essentially rebuilding Kanan's lightsaber. And sure, maybe it's because I love Kanan and he's essentially one of my favorite characters, if not my favorite character in the Star Wars universe, that I absolutely love not only the name drop, but also the saber rebuild at the same time. Now, I of course have no idea where Ezra got a kyber crystal to build it unless Huyang just has a stash on board his ship, the Crucible. Not really sure if they're going to end up revisiting that, but I do think it's rather odd if it's left out. Now, the next pro for me was the Night Troopers and them finally becoming zombies. Well, I mean, I actually thought that they were zombies the whole time, considering that they had all that red tape used by the Night Sisters that they had previously used to keep the dead and or injured alive, and were only revived when Morgan Elsbeth used her newly given Night Sister powers to revive them. I honestly couldn't quite figure that one out, but nonetheless, it was pretty awesome seeing those zombie troopers. And the last thing that got me really excited, with really no surprise here, probably has to be Baylan on the mountaintop and the statue of the Mortis gods, also known as the Ones. We get to see the statues of the father and the son, but not the daughter, as in just in case you don't know, she became the owl that Ahsoka saw in this episode. Now, this is really cool and all, but it makes me wonder if whatever Baylan is looking for, and with Ahsoka and Sabine now stranded, if they'll end up finding yet another doorway to the world between worlds, much as Ezra did in the final season of Rebels, and end up using that to get home, since they really have no way to rein in the Purgles like Ezra was able to, though Ahsoka did kind of have a connection with one earlier in the season just to get to the new galaxy. But regardless, I think that's what makes the most logical sense as to how Ahsoka and Sabine will return, though if they actually follow through with that, it may end up infuriating a lot of fans, possibly including myself, because it feels like such a cop-out and a waste of what really happened this entire season, and even the best episode where it looked like Ahsoka was in the world between worlds, but even then, that wasn't where she actually was. So the whole thing essentially has my brain scrambled, but that's essentially largely where the positives ended. And even then, as I'm sure you can tell, I even had problems with what I liked. But with that, let's go ahead and move on to the more ridiculous concepts that I thought we saw in this episode. And I think that we should only start at the beginning of the episode with the Great Mothers giving Morgan Elsbeth powers and the Blade of Talzin, which I don't necessarily know if it was summoned per se, or just appears like the Sword of Gryffindor to those who need it type of thing. But regardless, she ends up losing it to Ahsoka in their battle later, and it's never really spoken of again. So once again, I'm not really sure what will happen here. Maybe it will end up calling to Ahsoka or Sabine? Now, I don't even know if it can do that, but it could at least give them, or more specifically Sabine, a dark side temptation while they're stranded here on Peridea. And speaking of Sabine, the next big issue that I had pretty much involves her and her Force abilities not only being awoken to some degree finally, but that she's able to help Force push Ezra into the Chimera with essentially little to no training or even a wiggle of the Force, but I digress. And to top that off, not only does Ezra get away and back home, he miraculously escapes Thrawn's ship, undetected mind you, but that isn't necessarily a surprise because they've been able to get on Thrawn's ship a million times in Rebels and largely go undetected, but he miraculously finds his way to the New Republic, and more specifically the ship on which Hera's on, and ends up reuniting with her. Which they'll probably say that he just used the Force or connected with Jason to find them. But I can't quite figure out what Ezra returning alone accomplishes. I mean, he admitted himself that he has no idea where he was being taken or went with the Purgle, so him getting back to the New Republic, even assuming that they had the technology to do so, would face a massively impossible challenge of trying to find Sabine and Ahsoka again. That is, of course, assuming that Ezra doesn't once again use the help of the Purgles, in which case I think we're really starting to get into some sequel trilogy eye-rolling territory here. But the series ultimately ends with Sabine and Ahsoka along with Baylan and Shin stranded on Peridea. What they'll end up doing, I have absolutely no clue, other than maybe trying to avoid Shin, and then ultimately run into Baylan to have a rematch, and end up finding a new entrance to the world between worlds as I mentioned earlier. But it doesn't stop getting any weirder from there because the episode ends in its final moments with Anakin's Force Ghost watching Ahsoka and Sabine, which left me wondering what the heck this means or how it connects to anything at all. The only thing that makes sense to me, or at least that I could come up with, is that Ahsoka will inevitably finish her training with Anakin's Force Ghost, perhaps echoing Obi-Wan, where he ended up encountering the Force Ghost of Qui-Gon at the very final moments of that show. I feel like the series was so built up because of Rebels, which was absolutely fantastic, but maybe that's my own fault. Or maybe it's Filoni translating his work from animation to live action, or even higher up interference, or what may end up being one of the longest long game moves in storytelling as Filoni sets up his universe for future movies and shows, which I certainly wouldn't put past him. Ahsoka overall is just okay. It had a lot of hills to climb, and it did it at a snail's pace, but it had enough to keep me somewhat gaslit on a week-to-week basis thinking that it would pick up, when ultimately it was just spinning its wheels. And I think that I like things about the series, but not necessarily the series for itself, and for that reason the overall grade that I'm going to give Season 1 of Ahsoka is a 5 out of 10. Though I'll admit I still think it was better than the Book of Boba Fett, though maybe that's just due to the large use of lightsabers or even the Rebels connections. But then again, the only redeeming qualities about Boba Fett involved other Star Wars properties like The Mandalorian. I'm sure one of these days all of these stories will connect, make sense, and probably make these things so much better, but for now, it's just okay, and unfortunately, I'm not holding my breath for the next installment. But anyway, those are my thoughts on the final episode of the season, and Season 1 as a whole of Ahsoka, and now I want to hear from you in the Nerdgenic community. What did you think about this finale? Do you feel like that it was largely a waste, or was this the deep dive, slow burning Star Wars story you've always wanted? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, and while you're down there, be sure to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell notification so you don't miss out on any future videos, as well as my thoughts on the Season 2 of Loki, which will be starting soon. But while you're at it, and if you're on your phone, which you probably are, don't forget to give us a follow across all social media platforms at Nerdgenic. That way you don't miss out on any special news, announcements, or articles at nerdgenic.com. But in the meantime, if you want any more video content from us, check out my thoughts on the previous episode of Ahsoka right over here, or for more Star Wars content, check out this playlist right over here. But other than that, thank you guys so much for watching, we really do appreciate it, we hope to see you in the next video, and of course, may the Force be with you.